Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you all to my History Reacting channel. Today we'll be taking a look at Shipwrecked Conquistadors Become Native Healers, Cabeza de Vaca and the Children of the Sun. This is by a channel called History at the OK Corral, and as always I will include a link to the original content in the description down below. I highly encourage folks to head over there and show History at the OK Corral some support if you like what you see here. With that said, I just want to give a little background on this. The story of Cabeza de Vaca is one that was once widely known throughout the Americas. The book, which I have here somewhere, oh, right there it is, The Journey and Ordeal of Cabeza de Vaca, written by Álvar Núñez de Vaca, was once one of the biggest bestsellers in the New World, and for good reason. This account written by Cabeza de Vaca is the first account we really have of life in many parts of North America. Both the flora, the fauna, the terrain, the native peoples, all of that is described by Cabeza de Vaca. And what makes it really interesting is that he's not a naturalist. He's not a conquistador in the classic sense. He is a shipwreck survivor. It's a very long, complicated story, and we'll be getting into that in a minute. But he doesn't set out to write this book. He doesn't set out to become an explorer. He's there basically to keep an eye on the explorers. And through fate, I guess you would say, and a series of very unfortunate events, he ends up, along with three other individuals, traversing a lot of the southern coast of North America, somewhere around Tampa Bay, Florida, all the way across to Mexico City. And along the way, he's going to give us our first real account of that territory at a time before there was any significant European contact. So this is one of our only glimpses of life in Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, and all of those states, California for that matter, well, Baja California, at a time before there was significant, or even any, in many cases, European influence. So it's really something I think really should be taught more than it is. I know still a lot of Texas schools teach the story of Cabeza de Vaca, and I know it's still known in Mexico. But the rest of the states, I don't know, at least in my experience, it just doesn't come up like it probably should. Because this is one of the more epic stories of early American history. And it gets overshadowed by stories of like Cortez and Pizarro and those, Coronado for that matter. Although Coronado might not have happened if it hadn't been for Cabeza de Vaca. But we'll get into all that. I'm talking a lot before this, because this is a fairly short video. It's only 10 minutes long. This is a huge story, so I know I'm going to be adding a lot. So we'll see what he's covering, and then I will add what I can when I can. So let's see where this goes.
The source for tonight's episode is A Land So Strange by Andrés Reséndez.
I've read that
If you
book.
like tonight's story and want to learn more, stick around at the end of the episode to learn how you can check it out for yourself for free. Now, on to tonight's story. Florida, 1528.
All right.
In the area of what is today Tampa Bay, a group of Spanish conquistadors under the command of Panfilo de Narváez came ashore, setting foot in the new world they hoped to conquer for king, country, Christ, and of course, last but not least, themselves.
Yeah. So it looks like he's starting right in the middle. I think we need to get a little context here. And we'll start with talking about Narváez himself. Narváez had been the governor of Cuba. He had a right-hand man by the name of Cortez. You may have heard of him. He sends Cortez to help set up some settlements in what is now Mexico. And Cortez kind of goes off the leash and attacks the Aztec. And I'm sure we all know how that works out. Well, that was not on the agenda. And Narváez gets permission to lead an expedition against Cortez to bring this lieutenant back under command, so to speak. That goes very badly for Narváez. Narváez has about 3 times the manpower that Cortez does, but Cortez ends up winning. Narváez walked out of it with an eye patch and a grudge against Cortez. Narváez goes back to Spain. He gets permission from King Charles to return to the New World as the governor of La Florida. Now, you might think, oh, La Florida, that's Florida. Well, no. That's everything from Florida all the way over to the east coast of Mexico. In other words, basically all of it, other than the islands. So he kind of got an upgrade from being governor of Cuba to the guy who's going to settle everything from Florida all the way over to the Rio de la Palmas in Mexico, which is somewhere near where I think Tampico is now. Anyway, the only condition to this is that the king's not going to supply Narváez. He's got to supply himself. So Narváez raises an army of about 600 men. He gets some ships, and he sets sail again for the New World. One of the men that he's bringing with him is Cabeza de Vaca. He is a royal treasurer, and he is there as the eyes and the ears of the king. He is Narváez's new right-hand man, but he's working for the king as much as he is for Narváez to make sure that the crown is getting their cut of anything that Narváez gained while settling his new territory. And Narváez's plan is pretty simple. He wants to set up a couple of colonies over near the Rio de la Palmas, near Tampico in Mexico, and he wants to explore and set up settlement in the rest of his new territory. So along with all these soldiers that he's bringing, he's also bringing women, for example, to help set up some settlements. They arrive in Santo Domingo, where about 140 of the soldiers desert, which wasn't uncommon at that time. So he's already having problems. He heads over to Cuba. He ends up getting another ship and some more men there. He is going to... Initially, he wants to head over to the Rio de la Palmas and set up a couple colonies there. A hurricane blows him off course while he's trying to get to Havana to pick up one more ship. They end up changing plans, and they end up heading over to Florida, to where the area where Ponce de Leon had already charted. And they did have some crude maps of the Gulf Coast. They were very new. Not many people knew the area, and the maps were very crude. They had a pilot that claimed to know the area and understand how to get around. That will become a little questionable when we see what actually happens. So they end up heading over to Florida. The plan was, the pilot knew a large bay there. We're assuming that was probably Tampa Bay. And he was aiming for that because of storms, because of strong wind, and especially because of the Gulf Stream, an ocean current that tends to make travel in that region a little dicey if you don't understand it's there. They end up not where they think they are. And because of the Gulf Stream, a lot of their measures of distances and so on are way off. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about, basically you've got an ocean current that is flowing, depending on where you are in the ocean, either east or west primarily. It's a kind of a circular current. But the current is going one way, and the wind might be going the opposite direction. So if you're sailing, you got your wind direction measurement, you have an idea based on various techniques of how fast you should be moving, based on the wind and all that, but the current may actually be taking you at a much different speed, because it might be pushing you in the other direction. You might be going slower than you think you are. You might even be going backwards. Even though you think you're going forward at 40 knots, you might actually be going backward at 10. That kind of thing. So if you don't understand these currents, you don't know how to compensate for them, you don't have the tools to compensate for it, it can really wreak havoc on your navigation, which is what happens here. They do end up in Florida. To my understanding, anyway, they end up north of Tampa Bay, but they actually believe they're south of Tampa Bay, so they think if they head north, they will get to Tampa Bay, and that turned out to be quite the opposite. And we'll just let this video take it up from there, but that's how they get there. And they've already lost men to desertion. They've had a couple of hurricanes to contend with, and they aren't where they think they are.
In search of all the riches this new land had to offer, the group headed northwest into the territory known then as Appalachia,
Right.
named after the prominent tribe of the area. However, after months of
Okay, that's a little misleading too. They're heading into what they think they're heading into the territory of the Appalachia, and they do get there eventually, but it takes far longer than they anticipated because, again, they were off course. They thought the Appalachia were not that far away. In reality, they were about 200 miles away. So we're already in trouble.
hostile encounters with the natives and complete and utter failure to uncover any riches short of the food they were forced to scavenge to avoid starving to death, the party was forced to retreat to the coast, where
Right.
they fashioned impromptu rafts.
Okay, why rafts? Well, because they split up. So, what Narváez decided to do is, and this is against the objection to Cabeza de Vaca, he wants to split the company up. He wants to send the ships up along the coast to try to find the harbor they were looking for and to meet them there, while the overland expedition goes and investigates the Appalachia and some of these other native tribes and learn what's up there and hopefully find gold and silver like Cortez does in the Aztec Empire.
And killed their horses for food. They planned to float, God willing, to Mexico in September of 1520.
So yeah, they're in Florida. They're hoping to float to Mexico. That's a long trip by raft. Now, what they do is actually pretty impressive. He mentioned that they kill their horses, which they do. They do it for the meat, but they also do it for the horse leather. They set up a forge. They're going to forge all the materials they need using what they have available to build these giant rafts out of fallen timber. And we are having a storm nearby. I live in an area full of canyons, so you may hear some echoing thunder. That's probably why. It's far enough away I should be safe here, but these canyons really do amplify and echo this stuff. So if you hear weird noises, that's what you're hearing. And since we're doing a story about a group plagued by storms, I think it's appropriate. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, they use their horses, they build forges, they're building these giant rafts, and they're going to try to float them to Mexico. Now, that's going to be a challenge for a lot of reasons. One of them we've already talked about. We've got these ocean currents that, depending on what's going on, can take you in the opposite direction you think you're going to go. They're gonna have to cross in front of the Mississippi River. Well, that river is the river entering into the bay is going to push them out to sea. They've got a lot against them, and it took them, I want to say, several weeks to get from Cuba to Florida. Now, if you know how far apart those two are, that should already be alarming. That should tell you just how much of a struggle this kind of passage could be at this time. So they're really, really taking a chance, but we'll see how it goes.
242 remaining men launched their jury-rigged rafts into the Mississippi and met with initial success. At first, they were able to follow the current west, but when they reached the mighty Mississippi's Gulf Coast outlet, the powerful current swept them far out into the Gulf and separated the expedition's 5 rafts. 3 of the rafts drifted into the oblivion of the Gulf, never to be seen again. Among these was the expedition leader, Panfilo de Narváez.
Right. So 3 of the 5 rafts are pushed so far out that they're lost. All men on board are presumed dead. They vanish from history, and that includes Narváez, who's missing his eye patch in this picture.
The 2 remaining crafts, each with about 40 men, managed to carry on westward, until they crashed into what is today Texas's Galveston Island during a storm in November of 1528.
Okay, that's probably not accurate. It's long time been believed they landed on Galveston, and it certainly is possible. However, the descriptions written by Cabeza de Vaca and the descriptions given by the other survivors that make it out of this expedition, because they were all officially interviewed by the government to get their stories. So we have records of what all the survivors, their version to the story. Cabeza de Vaca is the one that wrote down his own personal account in addition to the interviews. The descriptions they give of this island don't really match Galveston. They do match a barrier island near Galveston. I can't even remember the name of the island now. It's it's a little barrier island right off the coast of Galveston. It's a major housing development nowadays. I can't think of the name of it. I want to say it's like, I don't remember. But it's probably wasn't Galveston. It was probably one of the little barrier islands right off Galveston.
By the spring of 1529, only 15 of the 80 men who had landed remained alive.
Right.
They named the island of Doom, and lost all hope of escape from it when waves washed away the only raft they had left.
Right.
Soon,
I'm going to really quickly just look up the name of that island because it's going to drive me crazy. But before I do, I want to mention that these barrier islands like this, they're not going to have they're not going to have fresh water. They're not going to have a lot of vegetation, wildlife. They're going to be basically mostly just sand and seawater. So they're in serious trouble here when they lose that last raft. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. It's Follett Island. It's probably where they landed. And like I said, to my understanding now, it's just a big housing development area.
the remaining men were found and taken prisoner, and thus made slaves, of several of the area's native tribes. This was common among many tribes who did not necessarily employ chattel slavery, but did possess sometimes great numbers of slaves, taken as spoils of personal war exploits. Cabeza de Vaca, along with Andrés Dorantes de Carranza, Alose del Castil Maldonado, and a slave named Estebanico, who had been owned by Andrés Dorantes prior to their capture. Estebanico, who was caught and enslaved in northern Africa in what is today Morocco in 1521, and subsequently sold to Spanish slavers and assigned to the Conquistador expedition, in which he was to perform basically nothing but hard, dirty, and unrelenting work. His tale would ultimately prove starkly ironic and ultimately tragic, but he would go down in history as the first African to explore the New World.
Yeah, and Estebanico is important later on. He actually, of all the members of this expedition, is the only one that has a really interesting, well, Cabeza de Vaca does too, but interesting follow-up history. And we'll talk about him afterwards because his story is also very interesting.
From here, these men would embark on maybe the wildest odyssey in the American West, well
Yes.
before it was even conceived of as the American West. The party, under the leadership of Cabeza de Vaca, would continue westward, down the coastal region of Texas, and then northwest along the Rio Grande, passing through what is now northern Mexico.
All right, let's take a look at this map real quick. So, a lot of them start in Spain. They go to the Canaries, probably first. Then they head down to Hispaniola, which is modern-day Haiti and Dominican Republic. They stop at Santo Domingo. Then they head over to Santiago de Cuba. They pick up more ships, more crew along the coast of Cuba. Whoa! Sorry, I warned you about the thunder. I don't know if you guys can hear it or not, but it's there. And then they're trying to get to Havana, but stormy weather prevents them, so they just head up to Florida. So they end up somewhere near Tampa Bay. The ships are sent to find the bay, and the land crew is supposed to rendezvous with them later. That doesn't end up happening. They make it up to here. Then they're in trouble. They slaughter their horses. They build their rafts. They're heading down this way until they get to the Mississippi. The Mississippi actually pushes them too far out to sea. 3 of the ships are lost. 2 of them continue on. They shipwreck up here, right near Galveston Island in Texas. And they start with 600 men. They have some desertions. Some are on the ships that were sent back. And of this particular expedition, it starts, I believe, with like 240 or so. I don't remember the exact number. And they're just losing people all along the way. When they hit Galveston area, they're down to 15 or so. And by the time they get picked up by the Native Americans and enslaved, they're down to 4. 3 Spaniards plus Estebanico. Then they're going to wander around Texas, up and along the Rio Grande, up into various parts of Texas and Mexico, up and across over to the Baja California, down south along the coast there, and then eventually over to Mexico City. And it's gonna this whole journey is gonna take them between 7 and 8 years. I think closer to 8.
And West Texas, where they would cross Mexico through the Chihuahua Desert, ending up on the eastern coast of the Gulf of Baja. From here, they would head south and then ultimately back east towards Mexico City. For those unfamiliar with the geography and
Oh, yeah.
topography of the areas where Cabeza de Vaca
This
and
is rough
Narváez
terrain.
ventured, it is some of the most inhospitable territory on Earth. Vast swaths of desert, jungles, mountains, coastlines, and grasslands had to be navigated, all under the always watchful and often hostile eyes of native tribes. Eventually, they were able to gain not only acceptance by many of the tribes, but they were held in reverence as holy healing men.
Yep.
Cabeza de Vaca and his group, who would simply employ the prayers they had been familiar with growing up as Roman Catholics, even themselves began to believe they might have been in some way divinely appointed to be healers to the native people. And while the veracity of their actual divination can be debated, what is for certain is that regardless of whether the listener believes it, de Vaca and company, along with the native tribes who they were involved with, did in fact believe that they were privy to supernatural healing powers. So,
They did.
For the better part of 8 years,
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit because this actually does end up happening. Initially, they are normal slaves. They are traded back and forth between various groups. However, they're devout Catholics. They do pray a lot, and when they come across sick natives, they pray for them. And when the natives recover, these guys start getting this reputation as being holy healers. When you read the writings of Cabeza de Vaca, he goes out of his way to avoid trying to portray himself as some kind of a holy man. He described how they did what they could to help these natives, how they were believed to be holy men, and how they would use their prayers and so on to try to help these people. But he really went out of his way to avoid implying that he actually had holy powers. And it's generally believed that he was doing this deliberately because this is the early 1500s. This is the era of the Spanish Inquisition. It's not that long after Columbus. This is not that long after the Inquisition reached its height. And he did not want to risk angering the church by even creating the possible belief that he's claiming to be a holy man, because that might be viewed as blasphemy. It could get him in a lot of trouble. So while he described all this, he's really careful how he portrays it. It's kind of interesting.
These men lived with their native cohorts as traders of goods and, of course, as healers. In fact, Cabeza de Vaca himself performed the first known surgical procedure in the New World by removing an arrowhead lodged deep within the torso of a native warrior. This garnered him even greater renown, and soon, a large group of native followers began to travel with and follow the guidance of Cabeza de Vaca and his men, believing them to be sent from God as healers. Their followers, a contingent of tribespeople from several local central Mexico tribes, referred to them as the Sun Children or Children of the Sun. However, after a number of years, the group from the now long-lost Spanish expedition grew homesick and decided to make their way by way of trading and native guides to the newly established capital of the still burgeoning Spanish Empire in the New World, Mexico City,
Right.
which lie roughly 1,000 miles away. So they undertook yet another unimaginably arduous and austere journey through yet more unforgiving territory. Water and food were scarce, and yet again starvation was only narrowly avoided as, after nearly half a year of painstakingly trotting their way through the harsh and unrelenting topography of central Mexico, Cabeza de Vaca and his cohorts stumbled into the city limits.
Okay, that's a little misleading. To my understanding, they were actually found by an expedition that was exploring the area around Mexico City. And the Spaniards who came across these guys at first had no idea what to make of them, because they were clearly Spanish. They had the beards, they had the and then Estebanico, who was clearly of African descent. They knew something. They were seeing something very strange, because these guys have obviously gone native. They've been living among the natives for years. They've been among them, healing them, working for them, and in some cases converting them. So yeah, this is a very surprise meeting for the Spanish. They really don't know what to make of these guys. But this expedition leads Cabeza de Vaca and his fellow survivors back into Mexico City. So yeah, they do stumble into the city limits, but they are under escort at that point.
Their tale was unbelievable, and the information and experience they possessed invaluable.
Yes.
Cabeza de Vaca would go on to return to Spain and then return to South America to do more exploring, quote unquote. He'd managed to embroil himself in a significant political turmoil as governor of what is now Argentina and be arrested for
Right.
poor governorship because the local soldiers thought he was not hard enough on the indigenous tribes of the area, whom they wanted to use for hard labor.
Very true. This 8-year odyssey across the island and southern coast of North America and the Caribbean has really changed Cabeza de Vaca. He is, like I said, they'd gone native. They'd been living among these people for so many years. He becomes something of an early advocate for Native American rights. And I'm not going to say he goes over the top with it. There are others that do take it further. But he does feel that the Spanish are being too hard on these people, and he does get into big trouble because he's advocating, let's not be so harsh, let's not enslave all these people. I've been a slave, I know how it is, let's find another way.
And returned to Spain, where he was eventually exonerated but died a poor man in Seville, in Spain, in 1560. Andres Dorantes de Carranza went on to marry twice and have 14 children, himself traveling back to Spain but ultimately settling in the New World and dying in the late 1550s. Ultimately, though, Andres Dorantes de Carranza might be the biggest jerk in this story, as he either sold, quote-unquote, or quote-unquote gave the fourth member of the party to the local viceroy to lead an expedition back to the lands they had come through. The Spanish, upon hearing of the great riches that might be available in these territories, attempted to entice all three of the other members of the surviving party to lead them back, but none would. But Dorantes de Carranza was willing to sell or give, though at the end of the day that seems like a bit of a moot point if there ever was one, Estebanico, to the viceroy with promises that he would serve as a guide.
Yep.
Estebanico, who had made his way from Morocco to Spain to Cuba, Florida, Texas, Mexico, and seemingly everywhere in between, who had suffered the same hardships as his party and been treated as an equal to his cohorts by the natives they came across, was summarily placed right back into slavery, seemingly as soon as they returned to Mexico City. He would guide a party in search of the famous 7 cities of Cibola, at least a year ahead of Francisco Coronado passing through the same territory.
So what he's talking about there is the Fray Marcos expedition. Marcos was a friar, Fray Marcos, who led an expedition up north to investigate some of these stories that came from Cabeza de Vaca and the other two Spaniards that survived this expedition. They were looking for the fabled 7 cities of Cibola. Now, those of you who are familiar with the idea of the 7 cities of Cibola know that it's 7 golden cities somewhere in the Americas. But that's a later legend. The 7 cities of Cibola is actually a much older story. Columbus knew about it before he ever discovered the New World. In fact, there's some writing between him, and I want to say it was his brother, but it might have just been another correspondent. I don't remember exactly who it was, where he actually, when he's planning his westward expedition, it's mentioned, watch for the 7 cities while you're heading that way, basically. So this legend is very old. It way predates the discovery of the New World. But with this discovery of the New World, and then you have these 3 Spaniards plus Estebanico traveling through this land, reporting stories of civilizations up in the north, the Appalachee. And they'd heard other stories from these natives that there are other villages that are wealthy here, over there, over there. These stories that come back with these 3 surviving Spaniards plus Estebanico get around quickly. And this fuels this idea that, well, maybe the 7 cities of Cibola are here. And now people are wanting to go up north, retrace the steps of the Narváez expedition, and find some of these cities that Cabeza de Vaca is talking about in his journals. And Fray Marcos uses Estebanico as his guide. He heads up to the north. He runs into some of the Pueblo cities in northern Mexico and even into New Mexico, parts of what is now the United States. I don't remember exactly how far they get up there, but they get really close, I know, to Acamascay City, which is in New Mexico. So I know they get up in that area. So they're hearing about these Pueblo cities that are up there, and they're looking for these cities. They find some, and that expedition comes kind of to a bad end because they get into conflict with some of these natives, and it doesn't work out for them. Many of them are killed, the rest are forced to return back. Later, Coronado would follow the same path and go much further into the heartland of the United States. But Marcos and Estebanico came first.
However, it was here in the vast expanses of the New Mexico desert that Estebanico would disappear. Some say he was killed by the natives, other accounts imply he may have faked his death and taken to a new life in the New World. His story is, in and of itself, worthy of an entire episode.
Yeah, it
is.
is.
Sure, Estebanico will get one soon, but for now, that is another story for another time.
Alright, I think we're done. Yep, sounds like it. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. I knew when I started the channel, eventually I'd want to tackle Cabeza de Vaca. So I went looking for a video. There was not that much out there that wasn't in Spanish, ironically. A few that were designed for classes in Texas, and a couple that were much longer, too long for what I wanted. I am planning to eventually do a original content channel, and one of the scripts I'm working on for that is the quest for Cibola. And I will be covering the story of Cabeza de Vaca there, but I will be focusing a lot more on how Cabeza de Vaca's writings and the publication of his memoirs really set off the search for Cibola in the Americas. Because that kind of isn't where this legend takes in a different turn. Like I said before, it was something entirely different. And we'll get into that too if I ever get around to doing that. But I do want to finish this with one thing. I want to read something from the journals of Cabeza de Vaca. Because, like I said, his journals cover a lot of the early descriptions of flora and fauna of the states, descriptions of the native tribes. It also includes what many people like to cite as the first description of a cryptid in the North America, or in the Americas. Well, North America. So I thought I'd read this to you just for fun. This is a supernatural encounter, and it's really quite interesting. And this takes place, I believe, somewhere around Texas, West Texas. So, chapter 35. The stories of the visitations of the bad thing. The Avares and tribes we had left behind related an extraordinary experience, which, in our equivalent of their vague way of counting, seemed to have occurred 15 or 16 years before. They said that a little man wandered through the region, whom they called Malacosa, the bad thing. He had a beard, which would not have been normal in that region, and they never saw his features distinctly. When he came to a house, the inhabitants trembled and their hair stood on end. A blazing brand would suddenly shine at the door as he rushed in and seized whom he chose, deeply gashing him in the side with a sharp flint 2 palms long and a hand wide. He would thrust his hand through the gashes, draw out the entrails, cut a palm's length from one, and throw it in the embers. Then he would gash an arm 3 times, the second cut on the inside of the elbow, and would sever the limb. A little later, he would begin to rejoin it, and the touch of his hand would instantly heal the wounds. They said that frequently, during the dance, he appeared in their midst, sometimes dressed as a woman, at other times in that of a man. Excuse me, I got an itch here. When he liked, he would take a buhio up into the air and come crashing down with it. They said they offered him victuals many times, but he never ate. They asked him where he came from and where his home was. He pointed to a crevice in the ground and said his home was there below. We laughed and scoffed, indignant at our disbelief, They brought us many whom they said had been so seized, and we saw the gash marks in the right places. We told them that he was an evil one, and as best we could, taught them that if they would believe in God, our Lord, and become Christians like us, they never need fear him, nor would he dare come and inflict those wounds. They would be certain he would not appear while we remained in the land. This delighted them, and they lost much of their dread. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there because I've always found that kind of fascinating. Like I said, we get to see some looks at Native Americans and just this region in general, all aspects of it that might otherwise have been lost. But thanks to this disastrous odyssey across the Americas, we have records of some of these stories, of these experiences, of these peoples, of these lands, of the animals and plants that lived there. In its own way, it's very reminiscent of the Lewis and Clark expedition, complete with the slave that goes along and is treated as an equal until he gets back to civilization, and which point he's put back into slavery. There's a lot of parallels here. The only difference is in the case of Cabeza de Vaca, it's very much a castaway survival story. These guys aren't there intentionally. They're there by accident. So, great story. I love the story of Cabeza de Vaca. I hope you guys enjoyed this as well. As always, I will be back again tomorrow with another video. And until then, thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.